Hi, it's Steph. Are you sick of pulling weeds every year and moving large piles of mulch? Well, today I'm going to share with you an alternative that will help you eventually have to use less mulch as time goes on, ground covers. And today I'll show you 8 ground covers that I grow in my garden that maybe you can grow in yours. When it comes to ground covers, they serve 3 main purposes in the garden. They keep your soil cool, they retain moisture, and they also suppress weeds. And you can do that through use of mulch, or you can also start planting some ground covers that will start to grow and spread, and over time will require you to use less mulch. One of the ones that I have in my garden that I absolutely love is lamb's ear. Now this is a perennial ground cover, or a perennial that can serve as a ground cover because it grows really wide. This perennial has been in my garden for a couple of years, and I've been able to divide it several times. It grows wider than it does tall. It can get anywhere from about 3 to 3.5 feet in diameter. It has this fuzzy texture, which means deer stay away from it. It likes full sun and a well-draining soil, and it has a really beautiful color and provides a lot of textural interest to the garden. And as you can see, I have quite a few clumps here. So over time, if I were to leave these alone, they would slowly start spreading and creating a really wonderful ground cover. This variety of lamb's ear is called Helen von Steen. And what's wonderful about this type of lamb's ear over the traditional lamb's ear is that where the traditional old-fashioned lamb's ear does bloom and set seed, it can become quite invasive. The Helen von Steen does not bloom, which means it won't drop seed, so it stays in a nice tidy clump of foliage. Here in this woodland bed, I have a variety of geranium called Geranium macrorrhizum, and this also makes a wonderful ground cover. I've had this planted here for several years, and it's pretty well behaved. And if it ends up in any place that you don't want it, it's really easy to pull out. It also blooms. It's actually all budded up and getting ready to bloom here in May in my zone 6. The pollinators absolutely love these little sweet pink blooms, and it actually also has a fragrance, the foliage. It's really easy to divide and move around, and as you can see, it makes just a really full ground cover. It's wonderful to plant under trees. You can see that I have it here in that application under some trees, which happens to be a really dry shade situation. It can handle full sun, part shade, and it's doing really well here in this part shade location. All right, moving along, I'm going to show you a couple of more ground covers, and I have one planted here in the back of this woodland bed that again is in a dry shade location and is doing really well, and it is a type of ajuga, also known as buggleweed, and this one is called chocolate chip, and it is currently in bloom here in my zone 6 garden. You can see that a bumblebee just landed on it, so the pollinators really enjoy it, and it has these really pretty bloom spikes of this indigo blue color. Now the difference between the ajuga chocolate chip, which I have here, and the other ajuga that I'm going to show you next is that this one, the chocolate chip, has smaller foliage. The leaves are much smaller, but they both have similar blooms. I have 3 groups of the chocolate chip ajuga planted here in this area, and it has done pretty well for me. These 3 groupings started from one perennial container that I purchased and divided and planted here as 3 separate plants, and it has grown really well for me. Some might say that ajuga or bugleweed is invasive, but it's been pretty well behaved here in my garden. The other type of ajuga or bugleweed that I have is over here in this other bed. So let's go over there so I can show you. Here I have a variety called Burgundy Glow, and it has really beautiful foliage. As you can see here, it has a burgundy tint to it, and it's a variegated foliage with shades of green and cream and burgundy. It also gets these blue bloom spikes right around this time of year at the same time as the other ajugas. And here in this back woodland border, I have several ground covers, and right beside the Burgundy Glow ajuga that we just talked about is this really beautiful ground cover. This is called European Ginger, and it has a really beautiful shiny green foliage that almost looks like a lily pad. Now this is a perennial ground cover that does die back in the winter, so it will go dormant for the winter and then it'll emerge in spring with all of this beautiful new green foliage. It's been really slow to grow here in my garden. I've had it for several years, and this is as big as the clump has gotten, and it likes a moist soil. And right here I have another perennial that does have foliage that stays evergreen and serves as a ground cover, and that is hellebore. Now hellebore is a beautiful perennial because it gets these gorgeous blooms in late winter, early spring that last a really long time. These started blooming for me in March, and it is now May, and they're still looking lovely. Now the foliage on hellebores is really large. And it will get a bit tattered over the winter and will need some cutting back. But at that point, the plant is in bloom and you'll get to enjoy its blooms. And then as soon as it's done blooming, it will start pushing out all new foliage that serves as a wonderful ground cover. Another ground cover that I have in this bed is lamium, also known as dead nettle. And there's actually a small example of that right here. And I have 3 varieties of lamium or dead nettle. This one here is called golden. And you can see that it's currently blooming with these small pink purple blooms. It also has a chartreuse yellow-green foliage with a white stripe in the center. Lamium comes in many different varieties. So I'm going to show you 2 more that I have here in my garden. Before we get to the other 2 varieties of lamium, these are all different varieties of hellebore here. And you can see just how large the foliage can get, for example, right here in this area. Now these were newer hellebores that I planted this year, so the foliage is all intact and it's really beautiful. And evergreen. So here is another clump of that gold lamium or dead nettle. And it's blended with some of the burgundy glow ajuga. And down this way, I have the first dead nettle that I ever got in my garden, which was a division from a friend. So I'm not certain on the variety, but you can see how this one is different. It has a green foliage with a silver stripe and a light pink bloom. And climbing across the front here, I have my 3rd variety of dead nettle or lamium. And this one is called Purple Dragon.
You have Maverick behind you.
Oh, Maverick's visiting, the neighborhood cat. He likes to check out my ground covers as well. But this one here has a really beautiful, this one might be, besides the gold, this one has a really beautiful foliage. It has a large silvery foliage. Look at that. It's absolutely stunning, and this spreads really well. Again, I started with 1 container and I've been able to divide it several times. And this one is also in bloom, and it will sporadically bloom throughout the season. Now, ground covers that bloom, even when they're not in bloom, they are still really beautiful because they offer a lot of interest with just their beautiful foliage color. Here is another perennial ground cover that stays evergreen for me here in my zone 6, and it is a type of sedum. So sedum likes full sun and a well-draining soil that leans dry, and it can take drought, which is wonderful. This is called the Angelina stonecrop sedum, and it has a beautiful color all year round. In the cooler months of fall and winter, it will have sort of a bronze coloring. And as we get warmer in spring and summer, it will take on more of a yellow chartreuse coloring. As you can see, it's really happy here in my garden, and it has spread pretty well. And it's so easy to propagate this sedum. You just take a couple of cuttings, shove it in the soil, and you can keep spreading it as a ground cover throughout your garden. So as in the last bed where the sedum was, we have to mulch, so please excuse the look of the garden at the moment. It's early spring and we're just getting out here and getting things done. But I wanted to show you one more spot where I have some of this Angelina stonecrop sedum growing. Right here between these cobblestones and pavers on this patio. I actually really like the look of it. And I have one more ground cover that I want to show you, and this one actually happens to be an evergreen. An evergreen as in it is a conifer type that will stay that way all year round. And this here is a work in progress area of my garden. It is a hillside, and the ground cover that I'm going to show you is an evergreen. And it is particularly helpful in a situation like this because if you have a spot such as a hillside or a really steep slope that makes it difficult to mow, and if you need to retain soil and prevent erosion, a ground cover like an evergreen will be a great choice. And here I have some blue rug juniper. I've had it planted in this space for about 2 years now. This is its second season, and it's growing pretty well. It's a really nice spreading evergreen, and my hope is that over time it will begin to cover this fabric and kind of drape over this hillside. It has a really pretty green coloring that goes a little bit blue over the winter months. And it likes full sun, and it's also deer resistant here in my garden. Well, my cameraman asked me of all the ground covers that I showed you today, which one was my favorite? And that's actually a tough call because initially I was going to say my sedum, and then I thought about this purple dragon lamium because it has a beautiful silvery foliage, and then I like the lamb's ear, and of course I can't forget the hellebore because of the beautiful blooms. So to be honest, it's hard to pick. I like them all. So let me know in the comments below, do you have ground covers in your garden? And if so, do you have a favorite? Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button. And please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos. And we'll see you soon.